Yo, this is Heist. Welcome to my studio. Today we're going to be going over my track Misery Guts, which is forthcoming on my new album Iacon, out in May. So we're going over a track I've made today for my forthcoming album. No one's heard this yet, so this is part of a set of tracks, and I just picked this one today because I thought it's quite kind of, you know, got quite a lot of interesting stuff going on in the processing. So yeah, let's get into it. I'm just going to play you a little bit of the intro first. So basically that was just a vibe I was sort of going for, like a, it's almost like a cinematic feel to it, like not super complicated but just warm, and had a tension about it. So I'm going to go and show you what I did. This is the intro stems folder. All the different sources are in this folder for the intro, and I believe it was Massive. Yes. So Massive is basically creating that atmosphere there all on its own. Nothing else is really being worked in yet except for a little hi-hat. Just for the DJ really. I always like to keep it quite minimal but still mixable with some sort of element that lets the DJ mix it. Some people would disagree with that, but like as a DJ myself and as a DJ before even a producer, I've always kind of remembered that. So if we take a look at this, it's called Fizzy Highs. So that's still on the keys there. All it really is, it's just a simple Massive preset with using really basic algorithms for the wave table. It's just a square saw and a square saw 2 on the one below it. So that's the two oscillators, and then you know you're using filters. If I turn the filter off here, it's actually even more fizzy. So you know, that DAR filter there is just literally just dampening the top end harmonics. And I'm using no, that's not doing anything. Then it's just really about effects over here. If I turn all of those off, you see how it's just sort of dead really and just dry. That's mainly to do with the reverb and the delay. So the delay's on first, and that's actually doing a left and right independent delay. That's why it's called a sync delay, because it does a left and a right independently as an echo. So as I've put that on, it's actually doing 1/4 and 1/8. So that's quite a kind of nice cohesive number arrangement there for me. It always seems to just, you know, without it, it's completely dead. And then add to that a reverb, which just sets it in that space a little bit even more. And yeah, finally at the end, just some EQ, not really doing much, just a little bit of mid-range sort of, I don't even know if it's mid-range, maybe high-mid sort of boost there, but nothing big on there really. I can just about hear it, but it's really subtle. So basically that sound is what forms the tension, if you will, for this intro. Now on that sound I did put a few plugins, I can see them coming up. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn them all off and see. Let's actually get this a little bit bigger so everyone can see which one it is. Okay, let's just turn those plugins off and have a listen to that. Right, notice straight away how thin it is and kind of just, it's a little bit bland. And as soon as I put that processing back on, it just really brings the richness in, which is what it seemed to be lacking when I first got it. So let's just go through. I'll turn them all off. I'm going to turn the EQs off as well. The EQ, just to let you know, was a low shelf at about 100 hertz, 107 hertz I think that is. And I was just doing a subtle kind of boost with that, because I find with low shelving sometimes, you know, just trying a little bit of it to see if it does just make it a little bit richer can be a nice indication of if that's the direction you need to go with the process. For me, I just put that in. And I can see in the analyzer and here that it's just very subtly taken up the warmth a bit. So I went and add more processing. This is another delay that I'm using, but I think this is being automated. So this is probably not doing anything. No, this is not actually doing anything to the sound as we hear it at the moment. You can see that because the mix is turned all the way to 0. So as it goes further in the track, if I show you here, look, this is the automation that's controlling that mix. So yeah, that will come into it later on. We'll talk about that in a bit. What else have we got on there? Okay, so I'm using this as also for automation. So I guess from this, what I'm trying to show you is I will use different plugins that are there to shape the sound at a certain time in the arrangement. And that filter is doing a similar thing. At the moment, you can see that the cutoff is completely down, so it's not actually doing anything. But that will lift up later on in the track if I show you. It's over here. There you go. At the moment, it's bypassed. Let's just go and unbypass it in here. There you go, so you can hear there the way it kind of takes the massive sound just up into the, it's almost like a riser sound, but a riser sound usually has a pitch about it. This isn't a pitch, this is just a high pass, giving you that feeling of going up. And that's just simple automation. You can do that in any DAW. It's not applicable to any DAW at all. Just go and use whatever appliance you need to achieve that, basically. Also on there, this is still not anything that's actually done anything to the sound apart from at certain times that we've looked at. So LFO tool, now this will be doing something. LFO tool is really clever. I've mentioned it before in videos. If you've watched, I think it was the Metalheads video I did for Steinberg, then I did it in there. And what I'm doing is similar kind of thing again. I'm controlling the volume amplitude. That is all I'm doing. It's very similar to side chaining. And for me, I find it really kind of nice and musical. Like there's no complicated setting up of sends or anything like what you get with some side change examples, which is a little bit of a message with your mind a bit. But with this plugin, if I put that on, you can hear already it's just straight away doing that movement. So where you can see that there is black, it has basically got the sound down, and when it is up, that is when you're getting the fullness of the full sound. And you can adjust this. Yeah, so LFO tool on there, just doing that little bit of movement to give the sound a kind of different dimension, I guess. Then we've got another plugin, which I've just used to, again, plugin actually, but it's not actually doing anything at the moment. Again, this is another automated plugin that will probably do something on one of these lanes that you can see I'm hovering over here. So let's just have a little look. Yes, and still not actually doing anything. So yeah, that is, not sure what that's doing. It must be somewhere in the track somewhere, otherwise I wouldn't have left it on there. And then there's one final thing on there, and this is quite important. This is definitely to do with the processing of the sound. I love this plugin. It's now going to be revealed to you. It's the UAD Voice of God, otherwise known as VOG. Little Labs, absolutely amazing plugin. What it does is it's basically a low end for bass and stuff, and low end frequencies in texture. I tend to find it will really give you an almost analog feel, like it's been recorded from an analog source. It's the only way I can really describe it, and I haven't got another plugin. You know, I teach a lot of people music, and a lot of people are like, oh, I haven't got UAD, where can I get that kind of similar kind of effect? And the simple fact is I don't know of one that you can, not like this. It works really well. So I put that on. Let's just turn it off. For me, it's night and day. It's literally an extra 20% of the sound now is being created just warmer because of this one process at the end. And that's why when I go and turn them all off, you can hear it now. Although some of those things aren't constantly changing the sound, they are in there doing their thing at certain times, the other effects are changing the sound and making it better. So that's the intro. That's quite a lot of processing for me on a sound as well. A lot of the time I won't quite go to the depth of that, but yeah, as I said, it's not all constantly doing it at the same time. So from that, I just let that be for a second. Little sound, little incidental, and in this track there is literally, I don't know how many, but a lot of incidentals as detail. For me, when I'm writing and trying to keep myself interested and not let any of the holes just go past me, and by holes I mean parts of the track where just need that little sound just to fill the space, so that it's not so empty. And I was told by someone the other day that they really admire me for that, because I put a lot of detail into those sounds, and you'll only hear them once or twice in the arrangement, but they fill that sound gap. So that was one of those sounds just there, and it was actually it's actually made him massive as well. I'm a big massive user, yeah, definitely. Even though there has been other synths like Serum and various others that I've got, and even my hardware synths, you know, I love using massive just because there's a certain workflow I have with it that gets a result. Yeah, there you go. There's the little kind of bass sound that I used. It was only used very kind of briefly, as well as literally like a one shot, just in there, just to fill a space really. And also just then there was like a little reverse. I don't know if you heard that. There was like a little reverse sound. What I actually need to do is undo all of the groups so I can see I'm not missing anything. Okay, so we've got drums down here, and you'll notice, see now the track is actually, didn't look like there was very much there to start with, but now I've actually unlocked all the folders. We can see there's quite a bit of stuff there. So I was looking for that little sound. There it is. So it's just a little hi-hat reversed, I believe. Don't think there's any processing. And if it will let me play it. Yeah. But that was just there, just at the end of the bar. There is a little bit of processing, a tiny bit of saturation on it. Sometimes, oh yeah, you can definitely, you know, I mean, it's making it louder, but there's also colorization going on in there that isn't part of the original sound. And all I've done here is I've actually used the basic Cubase channel strip, just with the tube saturation on. I can actually get the plugin up for that there. There's how simple it is. Look, it wasn't actually a big deal. I just literally put it on, kind of liked it, and that was it. But it seems a bit thicker as well than the original, if you can do that with a hi-hat, but that's how it sounds. Anyway, so little incidental sounds coming in. Now at this point, 8 bars in, I'm thinking, right, I need progression now. I need to start evolving this. So I basically went into Reactor, and I can't tell you what I used, not because I don't want to, but because simply I don't know what it was. But I've got a Reactor bounce here of something that I made, and it sounded like this. And that's actually been faded in. I found it quite interesting, and when I put it with the layer, it just added to the tension. I don't think I did a great deal to this, I could be wrong. Nothing on the strip. It's rare that I use the strip. Yeah, and actually nothing on the inserts either. Nothing at all. It was just straight out of Reactor. It's almost like it worked. I didn't need to do anything to it, so I thought, hell, I'm just committing straight away. When you find those sounds, it's always really important to just jump in and get them in there. And I mean, it's fading in. I did that processing post making the sound. But the thing with Reactor is, and what I want to stress is, sometimes in my experience, I've made these amazing sounds at the time, and then when I've gone to load the project back up, the sounds disappeared. I've got something different because probably didn't do something specific in Reactor to make sure it came back. So what I always do with Reactor and synths that are a little bit kind of, you know, you don't know if you're going to be able to kind of necessarily get the program back if you have to, just bounce it into audio, just so you've got it then. And with that sound, I was pretty much sure I wouldn't be able to get it again if I lost it. So Okay, so they're the two basic layers that make up the intro. And you can hear that one slowly coming in on the fade. But what else we've got is around this sort of 8 bar mark that's starting to come in is effects. So I've got this little kind of texture effect, and yeah, basically that's just coming in again, filling in a space for me. Okay, let's just have a little look at what's on that. So a low cut, I say a low cut, sorry, that's a low shelf. Low cut would be this. Okay, so it's just a low shelf, and I showed you low shelf just now when I was actually pushing the frequency, but in this I'm reducing it. Sometimes I'll use a low shelf just to dampen rather than completely cut away. It's like saying, hey guys, you can stay at the party, but you've got to calm down, rather than chucking them out. You know, like with low end, I find it's just nice to kind of have that option and try that if you're not already, because you can find that if you cut away too much low end, it just goes very thin. It's natural that that's going to happen, but you can sometimes cut off just enough with a low shelf that you get it just as you want it without getting rid of all of it. And you can see in the example there, I'll just play that again. That small amount is all I wanted to roll off. Okay, cool, so that sound's coming in. There's no effects on that apart from that little bit of EQ, but it sat nicely with and then what I did is I went and got another one and did a similar kind of thing, another effect, and just replaced. Almost sounds like robotics, doesn't it? Again, separate EQing. I'm just taking down the low end with a shelf, nice and subtly, and I was also just reducing any top end. I'm not really sure at the time why I did it. I don't think that would make any massive audible difference, but you know, producers, I mean, personally, I am a bit OCD about things like that, so I will do a cut sometimes if I think there might be something menacing there. Okay, so 2 layers that are being added into our main layers that are constant. I then thought, well, I could copy those over, but instead, why don't I copy it over and then replace it with a different texture? So here's another one that replaces the first one that came in. Again, that's almost like Foley. That's almost like someone's tapping on a typewriter and there's some sort of motorbike going past or something. But when you listen to it in the context of what's going on with everything, it's literally just filling that gap. If I took that sound effect out there and just played it without, for me, that's still empty. That still needs that little texture in there just to give it detail. There we go. It's not getting in the way, but it's accompanying nicely. And then I've gone and copied the second one over. We just copied that over and changed the first one to this one. And you know, however you're going to get there, man, just get there. You know, use as many sounds as you want. Use every single one different if you want. But I wanted to have some sort of repetition. Like I think any dance music should have potentially have some repetition. It has to. Okay, so we've looked at all those sounds, but there's now a big sound coming in across the whole, over the whole thing, which is just a downlifter, a sample I found. Transition's really important at certain points in the track for me. Like if I'm not hearing some sort of transitional sound coming in at the end of a 32 bar period of texture, then for me I'm like missing that, and it always seems to be something I tick, some sort of interest at that point. So, you know, 32 bars, something's going to happen. It's either going to start to build up or it's going to drop or something's going to happen, you know. So I think I did much process into that at all. Just high shelf reduction, again, just dampening, not cutting. I'm sure if I turn that off, that's going to be way too bright. Let's have a look. Yeah. Wasn't feeling that brightness in the original sound at all, so just reduced it slightly. Yeah, but that's a That's a simple sort of faller riser kind of thing going on there. But when you think about it, elements now, two main things, some incidental sort of sound effects that are coming in, that sound and that little bass sound that came in at the start, it was on massive. That's pretty much it to this point. Okay, so that's pretty much the first 32 bars there covered from start to finish, apart from the little hi-hat, which it would be a shame not to look at it, so let's just, there's a couple of little hi-hats actually. There's this one, and there's also the constant kind of typical, you know, quarter note hat. Let's talk about that one first. So I don't think there's anything on here at all. No, literally just dry, literally for the DJ, but it fitted with no reverb or anything for me. This guy down here is more a sort of knocking percussion with a click at the end of it. It was completely like that when I found it, and all I've done to it is two things. I've rolled off the low end, so I have actually cut that, look, with an actual low cut, which has kind of helped it, and then I've just driven it with the tube. There's not really much to explain with the tube apart from you use the drive and then you use the output to gain stage if it's too loud, or if it's what you want, you leave it where it is. But you can hear the clear difference from both those processes. That sound just didn't sit right with me. And I think it's important to remember as well, while I'm thinking of this right now, is that nobody else is going to hear these sounds on their own. So that means that although you have the power to do that, don't neglect the power of having to listen to it all together and actually commit to that, because that's where it's going to be most important. You can, you know, all day EQ something or process it without everything else going on, but if you're not actually getting it to sit in that mix, it could potentially be pointless, you know. So I just wanted to kind of bring that up, something I always try to bring up with my clients as well. Let's just hear that in the mix with and without that process then. See what I mean? It's just, it's lost. It doesn't sound, it's much better. And that's what I'm talking about. I probably did do a bit of that on the sound on its own, but then I would definitely listen back within a minute to see if it's working with the whole scheme of things, you know. Okay, cool, that's that explained. You've got another little sound, sort of percussive sound, and this all helps, you know, mixing obviously for DJs. Not that it is about that, but I think it sometimes does depend on if the DJ could actually play it. So with little things like this, you are going to be making that more available, I guess, in that sense. Okay, that's just that little reverse symbol. So that's all of the stuff of the first 32. Then we have this 16 bar amount of time. And in this 16 bar amount of time, I need to break away from what I've created as the sort of transition from intro to where we are now, and transition away from that using the word again to actually get to the drop. So I've got 16 bars to basically do that in, to make it DJ friendly and whatnot. So let's just have a listen to what happens. Okay, so basically we've got a kind of fall away, like I say, from the intro. At this point here, we've got a sound coming in, and it's again, it's what I call a transitional sound. Okay, it's actually, believe it or not, the sound that I used earlier on where you couldn't hear it properly. That is something I didn't realise, but a nice kind of two birds with one stone kind of technique there. We couldn't hear it as well because there was that bed of sound going on from the atmospherics in the intro. But now we've got it on its own and we're actually playing it without that big bed. It's actually right there, look. You can even see it's on the same thing. So and it kind of makes it fall away. The transition's short, but it kind of makes it just fall away. And I'm still holding everybody with the sound of that little weird, almost sort of sequence that's going on. I've left that in and dropped the main pad. So you've still got that connection, if you will, to the intro at this point. Still keeping those incidental textures coming in. There was a little sound effect there that hasn't been heard yet. That's just a one shot. I find loads of these. Again, these are just what I was talking about in the beginning. I'll get a lot of sounds that you only hear once or twice in the arrangement. That has got some processing on it, simple stuff, just a simple ping pong delay. Every door's got one of these, and I've got it set. You can see the settings there, quarter note, 65 on the feedback, yeah, applicable kind of low and high filters, and then just a mild mix of 35%. But without it, it just kind of, it didn't really sit right. It needed that little tail. And it's subtle, but you can still hear it now. They're the kind of small attention to detail that I go for in the track. You know, other producers may have just left that with no tail, but I just felt it needed to sit right. And that's the difference, I guess, with just putting it in there and then not giving it its TLC, you know? Okay, so we've got that little sound. It's starting to build now. So the first 8 is kind of getting down, and then the second 8 is where it's actually starting to build up. And at this point, I have got another massive in here, just making a riser effect, I think. Let's have a look. Yeah, so, okay, so I made this little riser effect. Let's just have a little. Yeah, and I just played that in to make it rise. It's almost like shaking up a bottle of Coke, and just to the point that it's just gonna, you know, and that's essential for a drop, I think. You've got to have some kind of rise if you really want to kind of build. You don't have to, but like, I think to build tension again and that drop, you know. But that's the only rise in there. There's a Vox that comes in, which is, let's have a look at that. I believe I got this from a source.
After I'm gone,
yeah.
Your earth will be free to live out its miserable span of existence.
So I think that was pre-processed before I put it in here, because I haven't got that much on it. It certainly sounds processed to me. I have got 2 plugins that we need to quickly have a little listen to. They were actually turned off, but they should have been turned on. That was where I was messing with it.
After I'm gone,
there we go. So
after I'm gone,
we've got 2 plugins, both Cubase simple plugins that probably every door has got.
after I'm gone,
But that's without them.
after I'm gone, after I'm gone, your earth will be free to live out its miserable span of existence.
And what they do is they just seem to crisp it up a little bit, and it's actually just this one that's doing that. It's the Bit Crusher. I've been using Bit Crushers for absolutely ages, ever since they really started coming about, because I remember a time when the hardware didn't even have Bit Crushers. You know, we didn't have Bit Crushers on some of the Acai's and things like that, but now you can just put a Bit Crusher on anything and literally just sort of, you know, make the sample rate worse, which can sound really good, and it does. Here it kind of really brings out, you know, the crispiness of, it feels like it should have had all the time for me. The settings are simple. It's just a Bit Crusher setting of 4 and then 12 bits. It's being crushed by 100% on the output, 100% on the mix. That's it. These little guys just give you options so you can have different types of setup for it. So if you go back, you know, you can just get a slightly different algorithm. But with this, I left it all at 100%. And this, I don't think this delay is actually doing anything on this. Let me have a quick look. It looks like it was supposed to be automated, but the mix is at 0, so I don't think that made. It's not doing anything at the moment. Let me just turn on this little, right, I can see, okay, so it gets automated there later on in the track. Right there, look. So that hasn't happened yet. We can always look at that later. But yeah, that's the vocal. A little bit of bit crushing on it, but definitely pre-production. Would have been some pitching going on there, potentially some some pitching and some maybe ring mod actually applied to that vocal, I think. I can't remember, it was so long ago. Okay, so let's have a little look at the drums then for this track. So drums will be in all on one group and will all be in a folder. So I'm just going to do a few things up so I can just get to those without everything else on the screen. That's a great thing about folders, you know, you need to get to the drums, and you go, and there they are. Let's just solo that group. Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to zoom on in there and have a look at just a loop. Because essentially once you've got, you know, a bar or two or four, it depends, I guess, but I can get a beat going pretty much in one bar. And then I expand it and, you know, start adding kind of little bits here and there. And with this, you can actually see it is actually all down to one bar, just from the blocks here. So if I go there, you can see that this is the main kind of repetition I was talking about earlier. That's my beat. That's definitely how I created it in that time space. And then I just started expanding it out as I went. So let's just have a look at this, the fundamentals. We've got the main kick, okay, which is just seems nice and kind of punchy and was a good source material. I can't stress enough how the good sounds are out there. It's not, for me, I rarely kind of layer 3 kick drums these days. I used to when I was experimenting, and everybody has to do that to understand about what they're looking for. For me, I like to find different genre kind of one shots, you know, like tech house, for instance, even, and also trap has actually been a place I've been going to recently to get a sound source that I'm looking for that isn't just what I'm looking for, but is also not part of a drum and bass mentality sample pack thing, because I'm finding that listening to a lot of people's music, the clients I teach, that at the beginning they're using just a sample pack I've heard so many times. You know, I've heard the same snare in probably 5 different clients' tracks, and I'm like, I really need to try and help people to stop them doing that. So my mentality has always been sample away from the genre that you're producing. Dubstep is definitely another place that I like to go, and this actually sounds like it's either come from a trap or a dubstep background to me. Now there's a little tiny bit of processing on this. Let's just turn it off. But with a kick, again, I'm looking for an initial sound that I think is going to be good enough as is, and then just try to do any small kind of tasks that I need to. Now I've added a Fab Filter Pro Q here, just rolling off with a cut some of the low end, because, and this is something I don't always do, but in this track I did. I felt that the low end was that much that it just needed a cut, not a shelf like I mentioned earlier. And you can still see there in the chart of the pre and post EQ that's going on there in the EQ. It's like the dark line is telling us where we were, and the lighter grey line is where we currently are, and that cut hasn't really done that much. Some plugins really show that nicely. That's why I love the Fab Filter, because it's very visual, and sometimes visual can really help with the audio kind of perspective. I've then added, I believe, a very small amount of low boost, only 3.5 dBs, but straight away I can just hear that that's giving it, for me, what it needed, nothing more than that. That's it, that's my kick for this track. Then we've got this main snare. And again, when I found this was one sound. I did not layer these sounds or anything with this. I found this as a sound, and I went and processed it. Let's have a little look at what I did. So a bit of processing on here, a little bit of minimal EQing going on. Very typical of me to have this little, I mentioned it on Twitter a couple of weeks ago, tiny little boost, sometimes 2 dBs on a high shelf at 1K. It's just, you know, we don't like to add EQ constantly, but a little tiny bit like that can give you a great perspective on if something needs a bit more clarity lift or if it's actually okay. And for me, I probably did that at the end of doing all this other process. So let's turn that off, and let's turn these off and have a listen to the snare. Okay, this is with it on. Okay, so I'll just take you through why I did and what I did. So you can hear straight away from the source it doesn't sound fat enough. But at the time when I found it, I was like, that's fat, but it wasn't. I got it in machine. I do all my drums in machine. It's no secret. Ask any client of mine, they'll let you know that I've taught them the drums in machine. And the point is that machine allows you to just take raw samples and simply manipulate the amplitude of the sample so you can control its overall sound. Okay, that's all I've done in machine. No, nothing else. I found the sample. It probably had quite a bit of reverb on it, and I probably cut that off with a bit of decay. So I've added the UAD, vintage UAD Pultec EQ. Why have I used this? This is my favourite EQ actually for kicks and snares, I find. I really like the warmth. It has a general warmth that you run anything through it and it gets a bit of colorization if you EQ or you don't, which is very cool. And it's just desirable. You know, it's got a desirable sound to it. And all I've done is I've actually added 200, I've added at 200 Hertz, just 2 dB. So let's put that in. Straight away, you can see it even on here. It starts to, on my analyzer on the EQ there, it just jumps up a little bit. So that's all I'm doing is actually manipulating that frequency with this EQ. I am also attenuating the top end ever so slightly. So see here, this is a peak. That means I'm adding EQ. But down here it says a 10, so that means I'm taking away. I can also boost with this one down here, but I'm actually just taking away about just over 2 dBs of 8,000 Hertz there. That's it, 8,000. And that's it, that's a simple EQ I'm doing on the snare. Then I'm using a transient master by Native Instruments, fantastic plugin, let's have a listen to that. Okay, it doesn't sound like it does that much, but for me, what a transient master is doing is just going for the start of the sound, the transient at the beginning, and that means it's giving it a bit more kind of you know, punch, if you will. I know it sounds kind of cliche, but it is. It's kind of attacking the beginning of the sound to make it a little bit more punchy. And if I increase that punch, see, as opposed to having none at all, you can hear now I'm actually depleting the punch. So, you know, I went for a mild mix of 34%. It's subtle, but definitely makes a difference. And then after that, I'm adding the Trans-X, which again is a transient designer, but it's a multi-band one. So you could say I'm kind of going over the top with another plugin that does the same thing. It does, but this one is a multi-band, so it allows you to manipulate certain bands of frequency of transient rather than doing the whole sound, which is what that transient master was doing basically. So with this, you can see the settings. I've actually applied it to the area that I was pushing with the EQ, around that sort of 200 range. And these two bands are obviously giving us that central point here. And then I've just taken up the range and the sensitivity. Sensitivity's on 4, the range is on 14. I believe I might have, no, I don't think I did. I don't think I even turned down the trim. That's just bang on there like that. And again, it's subtle, but I think it's more noticeable than it was when I did the transient master. But if I turn the transient master off, again, like, it needed both of them. Okay, so that's the snare covered, apart from that little tiny bit of EQ which just went in at the end, like that, just lifting that clarity ever so slightly at the top, and that's the snare. Add to that then a clap just over the top of the snare. That's all it is. If we put those together though, you can hear how the clap is just accompanying the snare and just almost just giving it a little bit of body and a little bit of space, so it's not just statically dead. The clap's got a Aphex vintage. That's definitely one I always like to use for a clap. You can hear straight away that it is, again, lifting the clarity ever so slightly. It's just a simple case of just using these dials. AX mix is quite obvious what it does. That's the main guy you need to worry about. And then also to that, I've got a reverb. This is a really old one, but a classic. It's the Renaissance reverb by Waves. and that's without it, and that's with it. So we've just gone through the sort of really main, the fundamentals really there of the kick and snare. If we just review what we've actually got from looking at that. So then to that I've had to add groove. You know, people always say it in my lessons, people step to the beat but they move to the groove. So the groove has been created from a load of different one-shots from Machine. You can see along here it's saying group A1 blah blah blah. That's just me being lazy and not actually naming the groups. If I solo them and just don't play anything else, just have a listen to that. So that's that little groove that I was mentioning. And already, even though I've heard it a million times, I'm moving. See what I mean? You step to the beat, but you move to the groove. And I'm just moving about a little bit. And cliche as hell, but what's going on is they're all just little one-shot hits. I'm not going to break each one down because it will just take too long. Everyone's got hi-hats like this. There's the main one, and then if we cycle down, you notice that I've got little bits of panning going on. So if I just cycle through these ones here, oh, it's not allowing me to do that. Let me just click on them. So yeah, you can see along the side here, look, in my inspector, that the panning is changing. Some are in the middle, and some are going left, some are going right. And what that's basically doing is it's just fanning out those elements a little bit in the stereo image. Therefore not making them all just follow that same mono mentality, which they probably weren't doing. They're stereo tracks, but they would have been pretty much in the middle. And just doing that little bit of left and right for me just literally spreads out the mix a little bit. And you know, that's not a drum and bass thing. That's been doing on records for years. Like, I'm sure if you go and look at Beatles or, you know, people like that, Michael Jackson. Yeah, and all these little guys are also doing the same thing. Look, they're all just kind of a little bit left of right, one of the two. So there is how many elements? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There's 10 elements there, and it seems crazy to think of that all being in a one-bar loop. But they actually are, as you can see. And then reintroduce the kick, clap and snare. There is the rolling drum that you can hear. And if you just start to take away some of those hats, you see how they're detrimental to the groove. Look, I've just taken a couple away at random and you can already hear that the space is starting to get less and less that's filled up. So they are needed. The drums are all going to one bus, as classically does happen in nearly every production tutorial I've ever seen. Okay, so on the bus I have got nothing actually processing as far as I can see. A tiny, again, little bit of, but I can hear that difference from that. It's so subtle, but again, sometimes you're just looking for that very subtle boost. But yeah, there's not actually anything on there that's doing anything constantly to the sound at the moment. Just that EQ. So yeah, my Beats bus is quite simple, I guess you could say, in that respect. Some people have a compressor on there. Sometimes I do have a compressor on there, but for this, I think I tried it and it just didn't work for me. So if it doesn't work for you, take it off. You don't have to put it on there. I think that's important and was something we just learnt from that. So that's the drums explained. That's everything all to the master bus, which we'll obviously look at the master bus in a bit. There is a sidechain kick which has been muted this whole time, which doesn't make any actual sound. Let me just show you what I mean. Yeah, so you can see it's registering there, but no sound is coming out. It's what's called a ghost kick, and I use that for sidechain compression, just to have a signal go into the compressor to sidechain. Again, we'll look at that a little bit later on when we get to the bass. But yeah, that's the drums for now. So the bass would be the next thing I'd want to look at on the drop. Okay, so we've got the bass just coming in at 48 bars, which is, you know, the way it was always going to come in to be DJ friendly, I guess. The first bass sound is almost like a, you know, I guess it's a womp, you guess, but it almost sounds a little bit like almost ghostly, like it's not a normal, you know, I can make a womp with a square wave in literally a minute. It's not that, because that's not what it sounds like. What's going on there is massive, but there's some processing going on. I'll quickly look at the preset just to see what the sound source was, if anyone was wondering. Yeah, it's actually been made from carbon, and just carbon alone. Tiny bit of mod going on the wavetable position. That's being done by Performer 8, it looks like. Yeah, so that's basically just modulating it with a sawtooth set at this ratio, which is 3/8. You know, if I change that ratio, get a different sound. We're also pitch modulating with another Performer on a saw wave, but it's actually doing a 1-to-1 ratio, so that'll be quite slow. See, and if I change that, get quite an interesting sound as well. Disregard any of the other knobs here because they're just all turned down. And then what I'm using is a band pass. So that's actually the sound before the band pass. See how characteristical that is? Like, that's so important. Like, that process for me is like, that's the point where it goes from just a noisy kind of, that sounds sick, but it just doesn't sound quite as characteristical as that movement. And we're doing that with the Performer, but this time with the Performer I've actually used a randomized, I believe that was randomly made wave kind of sequence, if you like, that just follows as I, and you can see I haven't used any of this, just this little bit at the end. I've looped 15 and 16, and that's how I've made that work. Add to that some clipping, that little insert there, just doing a little bit of a clip effect, and also we've got a dimension expander, which again will add additional gain, as well as some, I like to call it a light shadow. Yeah, that's that sound covered pretty much. The processing on it that I've used, let's just turn that off for a second. So it had more low end in it basically. It was quite menacing, because the thing was, it wasn't sitting right with my sub having all that in there. So I had to do a few little adjustments. I basically put a FabFilter Pro Q on there and used a bandpass effect to actually reduce everything. Like, a bandpass is basically a low and a high pass together, allowing one band to pass, and that's what I've done there with that example, slightly sort of adjusting little peaks in it. Straight away in my EQ analyzer you can see how it's reduced compared to how it is before the plugin's put on. So that's just me sort of really homing in on what I wanted from there. We've then got a limiter shoved on there, doing a little bit of work. Actually, it doesn't look like it's doing much at all. But it does sound different, if you can hear it. You can hear it's distorting before the limiter actually goes on, and the limiter kind of relaxes it a bit and actually sorts that distortion out, even though there's no actual gain reduction showing. I think that's quite cool. And then finally I'm just adding my usual kind of tool, which is my output. I've just added a, you can get this plugin for free, Synaxis 3G fader, and I've put that up 2.5 dBs. So basic gain staging, I guess, because I'd already used the output here. That's why I went and added a different one there. And I like to do that rather than turning it up sometimes when I'm just seeing if a process is actually making it louder, or if I actually am getting a colour instead of just loudness. It can be difficult to tell sometimes. So that's all we've got time for now, but if you want to see part 2, go and buy the latest issue of Computer Music magazine.